The Earning Curve is a new platform in webinars and different than some of the other webinars you all may have attended in the past. You as a panelist drive all the questions, so go ahead and send your questions, start thinking about them. There's a thought bubble icon at the bottom of the screen. Type your questions in there and we will get them answered. We are talking about strategic planning today for middle market firms and manufacturers. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with our introductions. We have 4 expert panelists with us today. Oh, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Mary Ann Biangardi, moderator and host, and I work at business development at Schmershel Treloar. I am so sorry about that. I guess I was just thinking I said that because that was my first session today. All right, anchor panelist today, Mark Bowers. Mark is the founder of St. Louis Makes. Mark has over 20 years of new product development, product management, and business development experience. Fun fact about Mark, he loves to travel, and in the 80s, he actually spent 3 months working on a kibbutz in Israel, if I said that correctly, and I had to look it up. I wasn't sure what it was. It's a communal farm, so I'm not sure what his job was there, but he can tell us about that later. We also have 3 other amazing panelists today, and I believe we have audio for Jim Schmershel, but no video. I'm going to go ahead. Jim's working on that. They're troubleshooting right now. I'm going to go ahead and start with Chris Lozano. He's the CEO at Halcyon Shades. Chris is an attorney and combat veteran. Little known facts about Chris. Chris is a retired U.S. Marine. He served in combat operations in both Iraq and Afghanistan. His passions are supporting the causes of military veterans and building jobs for the middle class. And thank you for your service, Chris. We have high respect for all of our military, and I love that you're a Marine. That's amazing. He also coaches college baseball and is a singer and songwriter. Colin Frost is the Chief Operating Officer at Car Lane Manufacturing. Colin holds 4 patents, and he is a member of the board of directors at Car Lane Romheld, a joint venture with Germany-based Romheld GmbH and Car Lane Manufacturing in India. Fun fact about Colin, he is on the board of trustees at the St. Louis Art Museum and a supporter of Rankin Tech College. And he also holds a degree in theater from Ohio Wesleyan University. So let's go back to Jim. Jim, I think even though we cannot see him, he will pop on here in a minute. I'm going to go ahead and introduce him. He is the managing partner at Schmershel Treloar. So I work very closely with Jim. He's a wonderful boss. He's been in public accounting for 25. He's had this, well, for longer than that, but we've had the firm here for 25 years. He enjoys music, sports, and reading. He loves coming together, and he throws, well, we celebrate a lot of firm holidays, you know, of course, the big ones, but also like fun ones. Jim always likes to do something fun, like Chinese New Year, baseball season, National Donut Day, those kind of things. So he always makes it very fun, and it's a great place to work. Oh, and our firm also has an expertise in manufacturing specifically. So that's why Jim's going to guide us through the strategic planning aspects of the firm with Chris and Colin. And today, Mark Bowers, let's start out with you as you're the anchor panelist. We're going to go ahead and get started. What is strategic planning, or why is strategic planning important for manufacturers? And Mark, you're muted. Hold on. Oh, I'm so sorry. Mark Bowers, can you unmute?
There, can you hear me now? Awesome. Thank you, guys. I forgot, even after Jake had told us to unmute, I'd forgotten there, so apologies. Right, so the question, you know, I think there are a couple of different perspectives to look at that from. You know, one perspective is internally ongoing business operations, and then there's, if you're a tight family-held company and you're looking to exit or you're looking to partner, that's also possibly a dual path to you know, more standard operational strategic planning. So why is that important? I think a lot of times we get caught as business owners and operators pedaling the bicycle really comfortably, and it's like treading water. And there's not enough thought put into where you're headed and where you're going. And strategic planning gives us an opportunity to look at that not from one sole point of the organization, but across all functional areas to make sure that it's something that is a system-wide effort and initiative, and to make sure that we understand comprehensively what's going on internally so that we've got the systems, the people, the processes, the machinery in place to produce and to meet demands if we want to make changes. So that's one way to look at it from an ongoing business operations standpoint. Like I said, the other perspective is if you're a privately held firm and you're looking to exit or to partner with someone, you're a much more attractive partner if you have a clear sense of where you're headed in the marketplace and what you stand for and where you're going and where your opportunities are. And add to that some honesty if you're capable of sitting across the table from a prospective partner or someone who's potentially looking to acquire your firm, and you can be honest with yourself about, where you actually are capitalized and resourced to take advantage of opportunities, and, where a partner would add the greatest value or benefit the most, because it's not something that you have the resources to do, that you have the expertise, so that you straight up have the cash to pursue. Identifying those things and being honest with yourself about it, regardless of the two paths of your intent in setting up strategic plan in the first place, adds a great deal of value to the firm as well as to you as an individual senior manager or an owner.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. So let's go ahead and go to the chat. So it looks like the first question is, what are some special considerations in strategic planning that need to be accounted for by manufacturers? Mark Bowers, can you start with that? And maybe we'll ask Chris and Colin to weigh in while Jim's still troubleshooting.
Do you want to start with me or go in reverse? Are you starting with Colin? Or?
Yeah, let's go with Colin.
Okay.
Thanks. I think one of the special considerations for manufacturers is trying to figure out who your competition is. It can be difficult, especially as a manufacturer, sometimes to always benchmark that appropriately. And so one of the alternative methods to do that is to work to engage in a high-quality customer survey, right, to really try to get that feedback back from your customer and understand what it is that your competition is doing differently than you or better than you. And I think from a strategic planning point of view, it's sometimes even more important to focus on maybe what they're doing differently than you as so much as better than you, so that you can make sure that as part of your strategy, you're understanding the strategy of your competition to make sure that you are making very purposeful decisions in your strategic planning.
Thank you, Colin. Chris, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I think there's some things that are generic to all people doing strategic planning, which is starting with the intent or the objectives that are set by leadership within the organization. Those give you the basis to not only plan, but to operate from, because as I'm fond of saying, the plan is nothing, planning is everything. Planning instills discipline, and discipline allows you to deviate as you operate so that you can adjust and remain true to the objectives that you've set. I think it's very critical. But to answer a specific question about within manufacturing, for us, a significant component to manufacturing planning is our supply lines. And I don't call them supply chain, I call them supply lines because they're actually physical, they have physical implications on our operations. So I'm always looking at and considering how those are functioning and how they impact our ability to operate.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris.
You bet.
And this is Jim Smershel with a disembodied voice. Let me first say, as a lead-in, I apologize. I don't know why this camera isn't working. It worked literally earlier this morning. But may I say, for the record, I look fabulous. Besides that, manufacturing considerations, strategic planning considerations for manufacturing, in some respects are the same as for all businesses, which is to say, there are the external impacts, the internal impacts, and then your goals. And those are the three components you have to evaluate. And as a manufacturer, you have specific internal considerations you have to look at. things like internal capacity, things like the cost of capex that impacts manufacturers much more than it would some other kind of business. And special considerations now, and it becomes more planning perhaps and strategy, but with the whole COVID environment, you have to start to evaluate workforce availability and factor that into the automation versus manual process, because now not only do you have the return on investment consideration and the efficiency considerations, but the reality is machines don't get to COVID. And so that becomes another consideration.
I'm so glad. Oh, thank you. Anybody else want to add into that?
I mean, I'll throw one thing in there. I think building on what Colin had said earlier about knowing the customer and the competitive set, a couple of things, depending on the line you're in, a lot of times the competitive set is wherever that money is going. So it's not necessarily who you think it is, but it's anything else that the customer's cash could be spent on. So, the best examples, I think, because everybody understands them to make these points, are consumer goods examples, or potato chips competing against other potato chips, or if you see something outside of that category and you've got $5 in your pocket and you would have spent it on something else, it's obviously a broader way of looking at how that competitive set lays out, and that still applies even in B2B categories. It's just not as easy to understand as potato chip examples. So that's one thing, I think that people need to bear in mind. Mapping out who those competitors are. Like when I have done these exercises, we have mapped out not just the competitive set by brand, but we've also mapped out and tried to psychographically profile the management team so that we have a better understanding or believe that we understand better how they're likely to respond to moves and changes we make in the marketplace. So understanding not just the competitor, but what the people who are in charge of that competitor are going to do, respond, and how they're going to move in the marketplace can also be very valuable and very beneficial. That obviously is much easier in industries where, it's not as relevant in a really large corporation where you have, say, two massive consumer goods companies competing against each other and management teams move around all the time. But if you're in more niche markets or even smaller markets where you have private ownership and the ownership's been fairly constant and the management's been fairly constant and the philosophies and the go-to-market, the strategy and whatnot have been fairly constant, that actually does add a great deal of value in terms of guessing out how people are likely to respond to what you do in the market. So just a couple of things that I've done in the past to take into consideration. And, then lastly, I'll say I worked at a larger corporation for someone one time who mandated that on an annualized basis, we had to spend 40 hours in the field working with competitors' products at customer accounts. So we sold to commercial construction contractors, and we had to offer ourselves as free labor to those in the industry. We had to book ourselves 40 hours all on our own, working on competitive lines while we were in the field. You come up with a much, much deeper understanding of what's real and what's only real in your head when you're doing that. There were a lot of things that were real in my head about why competitive products had disadvantages that the field, unsurprisingly in hindsight, did not see eye to eye with me on. And it really informs the decisions that you make.
So, Mark, one of the things that I see increasingly happening in B2B manufacturing, especially in people who provide goods or services that are broadly available in the marketplace, is increased competition, not from other manufacturers, but from service providers, right? Whether they be website-like clearinghouses or other sort of conglomerators and middle people. I think certainly as manufacturers, we need to think critically about the role that those people play. Just because they don't make things doesn't mean they're not a significant threat to our business.
Threat or an opportunity too, because a lot of times they are such key influencers. I think it was one of the earliest lessons that I learned in my career when I was representing one of our lines. I used to be with the Toro Company, so they do $2 billion a year in landscape construction equipment. So, if you were in the field, you were rednecked up and you were indistinguishable from anybody else that was out there on the job site. And when you went to a trade show, it was a different animal and you were interacting with a different core altogether. One of the things that I learned early on was that trade publication advertising salespeople were not really selling me advertising. I didn't care what reach they had in their magazine, really didn't care who read my ads or who didn't. What I was buying was their introductions at the trade show. If I gave them $10,000 a year in advertising and they made introductions, and I looked at 2 of the companies that they introduced us to, and we ended up having serious negotiations about acquiring one of them, that was a pretty cost-efficient way to spend 10 grand. So finding people that are key influencers that are not what you would anticipate to be key influencers, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that they have the ability to influence the industry, your firm, and other firms in both good and in adverse, not bad, but, adverse to you competitively ways.
We do have another question here in the chat. What are the core elements of strategic planning that we need to address? When that is done well, what outcomes should we expect? Chris, do you want to add anything to this?
Sure. Well, I think we start with probably, for me, what has been the most critical, which is I never look at products first. I look at capability. What is it that we do? What is it that we functionally are capable of doing? If I limit myself to a product, then I'm never thinking outside of that dynamic. And so I've never been one to follow other people's leads, and quite frankly, I'm not that concerned with what my competitors are doing because I'm not blazing their path. I'm blazing my own. And so I look first, always continuously look at our capability, which is what is it that we do. So I encourage everybody to not only start with what your objectives are. They could be financial, they could be market penetration, it could be a number of things, but then look very closely at what your actual internal capabilities are. What is it that you could do that you haven't even thought about? So for instance, we make shades, but now we do PPE and we've cut book covers and we've done all kinds of things, and we never limit ourselves to what we actually can do. Obviously, you need to know capacity, and that is what the outputs are of your people and equipment, and those will help inform you on the overall ability that you have to meet certain things. But again, understanding what your overall capabilities are is critical to understand what you can actually achieve. You should engage in what in the Marines we call reverse planning, which is you start with your objective or objective-based outcomes and then plant to that. So if your objective is to meet a certain financial objective for that year, then you have to plan all the way down to the capacity, capability, people, equipment, resources that you need to get there. So that's what I would start with.
Jim, can you hear us? I don't know if Jim's back on there.
I can hear you.
Okay.
And I agree with what Chris said. Not surprising. Chris is a smart guy. A lot of it, and Chris alluded to it, is time horizon. Because when you're doing strategic planning, you have to identify what period of time are you planning for. If you have a 3-year horizon, then your strategic plan is built around that. If you instead have a generational, for example, sort of strategic plan, then your time horizon and your strategic plan is built around that. So it starts with defining time horizon and vision, which is what do you want to be at your core? And then taking those two things and looking at what you have as resources and applying that to the marketplace.
Thank you, Jim. Okay, we've got another question here. We have seen a radical change in our customers' needs. And in the marketplace as a whole, as a result of COVID, the pandemic has a short-term and very possibly long-term impact on our company and its customers. Some of these changes are tactical. Some may be strategic. If you are considering strategic changes in your business, can you share your thought process? Alan and Chris?
Well, Well, I'm going to let Colin go first. I think I jumped last time.
Well, thanks, Chris. I think the biggest challenge here in, sort of to Jim's point, right, short-term strategic planning is avoiding what we might call commitment bias or plan commitment bias, right? We have to be willing to take a fresh look at the marketplace and really ask how can we respond to the marketplace's needs and what are the things that are within our control to be able to react and respond to that. I would say that one of the challenges is being able to identify well enough what the market is actually looking for. There certainly a few months ago there was a great deal of energy in the marketplace. Not all of that energy was necessarily productive, right? And so I think once we begin to understand that, then we can begin to develop a strategy to how to address it. Obviously, Chris and his organization saw an opportunity and was able to pivot to that. I'm not sure that we would call that a quote-unquote strategy. Beyond that, Chris's organization was probably strategically designed to be able to support that pivot, right? And that's really where, for me, this idea of plan commitment bias or commitment bias really comes into it when we say, well, we have identified a strategy. Heaven forbid we deviate from it, right?
That's an interesting perspective. I'll tell you, my strategy is to survive, and so with that, tactics are not strategy, and strategy are not tactics. You cannot operate without a strategic plan, and so a pivot is a tactical deviation, yet it is still focused on your strategic objective, which first and foremost is to bring shareholder value, right? So you have to be. Fortune favors the bold, and you can't waste a moment to try to make that change. And some are challenged more than others. For us, it was real simple. It was pivot or die. We're in the middle of really of a reboot of the company when the pandemic happened. And it just gave us what has now led to a tremendous opportunity, and we wouldn't be there had we not taken the opportunity to do it. And it was really just a matter of being decisive, and had we not had a vision of the strategy, which was rebuilt. Sorry, I've got a motion sensitive activation in my office. So had it not been for our commitment to what I call capacity-based manufacturing, which is looking at revenue per square foot, we would not have been thinking about the fact that we could or should pivot. To me, it was completely consistent with that objective. I'm simply looking for ways to make money with what I have, and bringing that commonality down to the point to where everything is possible within that. So that's the way that we've done it, and I think anybody can follow that, but that's really the way that we do it.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Just to add to that, if I may quickly, we all of us are constantly dealing with shifting sands in terms of the marketplace. And the COVID is certainly a dramatic impact to the market, and of course, some markets more than others. But in some respects, it's no different than other significant changes that impact us on a day-to-day basis. We have an election coming up, and that election is going to change the environment, and it's going to change the way in which we have to evaluate decisions. Tax codes will change. God knows the CPA, I love that stuff. So all of those kinds of impacts are constant, and the coronavirus is a new variable that's been introduced into the marketplace that we have to figure out individually as an industry how to respond to. And that includes measuring short-term and long-term impacts of it and trying to play Dr. Fauci. How long is it going to be around? But it is hard. We are always, as successful organizations, evaluating the environment and changing our strategy accordingly.
Awesome. Thank you, Jim. we have another question here. Does your organization pursue growth and new business market development with as much passion as it does operational efficiency?
I'll dive in and throw a couple of words in on that, if you don't mind. I think that one of the challenges that I've seen in my career has been when you're at a firm where you have one particular functional area that has dominance or strength organizationally, it tends to warp the worldview of those functional areas around it. So if you have someone, for example, in the sales force, and the sales force is motivated or is rewarded on top line only, then what might be at risk in that environment, you might have operational efficiencies at risk because there's no consideration given to balancing how orders come in. You might have profit challenges if the sales force is so bold and empowered that they can actually cut pricing to close deals, and they can do that unilaterally. I'm not picking on salespeople, and apologies in advance to any that are listening, but it's just an example that I think people understand really readily, and that's the way that pursuing growth and new opportunities can get sort of out of sync or out of balance. You know, I think the key when you're trying to balance that against operational efficiency isn't that in a strategic planning environment, it's that you have balanced worldviews to all of the functional areas and all of the functional areas' needs. So if you had a balanced perspective in the example that I gave earlier, you might have an operational mindset instilled in your sales planning team so that when the customer said, hey, you know, I'm not going to order anything for 9 months and all at once I'm going to order a whole bunch of stuff and it's going to cause a complete slam on your production lines, you might have a salesperson who had the sense and the ability then to throw in and say, hey, you know, could we stage that? You know, here's how we could stage that. Here's what we could do with you. And maybe use some of those opportunities to balance order flow and to balance production requirements and keep the organization much more operationally efficient and not allowing one functional area to run ahead in the decision making or in the sales process. So I think that might be more of an indirect answer to that question. But in terms of how, in a strategic planning environment, different functional areas need to cooperate, those are some of the upsides and downsides that I've experienced.
I would say
it's worse when you have it's worse when it's coming obviously from ownership. I mean, if you can't get senior management to recognize that and you can't get that balance instilled at the senior most levels, then all other games are off the table. But if you can do that, and or that's who's listening, and that's what you want to instill, you know, then the challenge becomes, you know, what I would call managing your own leash. You know, you don't want to run ahead and chase the squirrel too much, and yet, you know, eventually you want to take a walk. So you got to be the person that sees what that balance is and sees what needs to come next.
Colin wanted to add something here.
Yeah, I was just going to briefly add that, you know, personally, in my experience at Carlane, one of the things that we have worked to develop into our medium-term strategic plan is some general goals and opportunities in terms of capex and its relationship to manufacturing equipment as it relates to cost. Certainly, cost control continues to be a significant issue. And one of the things that's important to me is that through that strategic plan, I am signaling to all of the senior managers and even frontline workers within our organization what our priorities are as an organization in terms of capex spending. This not only means that I don't have to spend a lot of time telling people, no, we're not going to do that, right? But everybody then gets to be on board and understand clearly what the vision is, right? What are we moving towards and why we're making the kind of shifts that we're making? Because at least in our manufacturing environment, when we start to change the kind of equipment that exists in the production facility, right, people start to feel very particular about machines and equipment that they spend all day, every day with for years and years and years on end. And when that begins to change, they want to really know what's going on and why is it different now.
Thank you, Colin. We have another question. Let's see. What are the effects on a company when no strategic planning happens, or if it's done poorly? What are the differences between strategic planning and tactical planning?
I'll take a stab at this. I think this is an exceptional question because it highlights the pitfalls that are beset most companies, which is you cannot operate without a strategic plan. Otherwise, that's like me heading out the door and not knowing where I'm going. How will I know when I get there, right? So I illustrate this point to people by using a simple description, which is it's like doing land navigation. If I know I'm going to that mountain over there, how I get there will deviate, but not where I'm going. All right. But if I head out not knowing I'm going to the mountaintop, I'll never get there. Right. So you always are you are always recalibrating your actions to the objectives that you set. So that way, no matter where the deviations take you in your production, it could be a disruption to your production flow, to your supply chain, your customer base. You can always navigate back to it because you know where you're headed. And that will tell you how to get, what to do to get back there. So that's why it's critical to have those things understood. It's very, very common. And having done operational consulting for many years prior to this job, it's one of the most common mistakes that I see. People, what are your strategic plan? Well, they don't have any. They just show up to work, and they work, and therefore they don't really know when they're off track. And so it's nothing else. It's the guideposts. It's the outer limits. It's the railroad tracks. It's the curbs. It's all the things that you need to keep you going in the generally right direction, because there will be more than enough things that will try to take you off track. But with those, you'll know how to navigate through, over, around, and under them to get to your objective. So that's why. Objectives are endpoints. Tactics are actions that get you to the endpoints.
Thank you, Chris.
All right.
Jim or Colin, anybody want to add anything before I go to the next question?
Could you reread the original question that Chris just answered?
Oh, gosh. Okay, hold on. Let me just make sure that I'm reading the right one. There's so many in chat now. Hang on just a second. I think I just passed that. What are the effects on a company when no strategic planning happens or if it's done poorly? What are the differences between strategic planning and tactical planning?
I was using that as a thought prompt. There was a thought I had, and then my mind lost it, and I just pulled it back. What I wanted to say in response to that was, so on the first part of that question, when there's no planning or when the planning is done poorly, I'm going to go back to that treading water, analogy that I gave earlier. You could have a company whose core technology came out into the marketplace a generation ago, and it was so breakthrough that they're still coasting on the strength of that new not new, but that technology from back in the day. And if they've not been outside of the organization in a meaningful way, analyzing markets, competition, and other technologies that they could bring to the market, they honestly could think as a firm that they are a new product development firm or a new product development shop, that they're pretty good at bringing out new technologies, when in reality, they're just treading water based on technologies that they had some years prior that they continue to do reasonably well with. So I think the effect when there's no strategic planning is that you create your own bubble as a management team and as an ownership team. You stay within that bubble, and it's not that you keep other people out of the bubble. It's just that bubble's yours and you're off on an island unto yourself. And the risk is that the rest of the marketplace eventually passes that technology by and you don't have anything new to offer. So the effects ultimately that, straight line that to its logical conclusion. I mean, eventually that firm goes out of business or is acquired by someone because they lose any efficiency and any edge. So that's what happens when it's not done right, or when it's done poorly, to which I will reiterate something that I said previously. If you have imbalance in the firm, it's going to be done poorly, because you will have a dominant functional area whose voice becomes the secondary voice of every other functional area. And that isn't really much better. I mean, that's still going to create a situation where in the marketplace you're not balanced as a firm, and you're not assessing opportunities correctly, and you've got one voice internally that's really driving the ship. So those are some of the challenges when it's not done at all or when it's done poorly. The differences between strategic planning and tactical planning, if you think about what I just said, strategic planning is sitting there trying to figure out where markets are going from a markets standpoint. Tactical planning is maybe best viewed versus that as firestorm management. You're not going to make any changes. You're not going to adapt to the future. You're not going to come out with new products. But boy, oh boy, somebody was jumping up and down when you went to that trade show. So now for the next week, you've got a firestorm on your hands. And because it has to be done really quickly and everybody's kind of excited about it and you're in fight or flight mode, it creates the illusion of being some kind of real planning exercise. It's not a real planning exercise. It's just a bunch of people not responsibly reacting to a marketplace that they should be trying to lead. I'm not saying that the customer's problems and challenges are not important and that tactical planning and responses are not important. I'm just saying that it's very important to us as owners and managers not to confuse those with something that's forward thinking about how we change an organization to improve efficiencies and improve marketplace offerings. So this stuff, I think what I hope everyone is seeing is really, really tied together. So that was the thought prompt I was looking for in rereading that question. I appreciate it, Marianne. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Okay, we've got, let's see. I thought somebody else wanted to add something. Chris, did you want to say anything or no?
No.
Okay.
No.
Oh, I saw you off mute. I was just wondering. Okay, we've got another one here. How frequently does your organization deliver new value-adding ideas to your customers to keep them engaged? Colin, do you want to try to start on that one because we had Chris last time?
Oh, gosh. Yeah. So I think, this is a good point to double back on Mark's idea that strategy is system-wide, right, is organization-wide. And so frequently when we think about products, right, I always think of products as sort of like the longest time horizon of our ability to add value to a customer, right? By the time that we develop something, we prototype it, we prove it out, we test it in the marketplace, we manufacture it, we inventory it, and we get it out into the marketplace. Tends to be a very long time. I think that we see value add more frequently on the customer support side of things, right? Whether that is delivering technical data, product information to customers, or whether that's improving, let's say, the call center experience or the transactional day-to-day experience. These things certainly do matter and have an impact. And so for me, the first place that we look in terms of that value add, right, especially the ability to respond to a need or an opportunity in the marketplace, tends to be on the transactional side of the business, customer support side of the business, as opposed to the product end of the business. And then to the question, right, we do it as often as is appropriate, right? And so that appropriate mix is that sort of mix of, do we have the opportunity? What other things are we not working on if we're working on this, right? What is the cost impact, if any? And then how do we measure whether or not this has made an impact to our customers on the back end, right? How do we validate, was this a good decision? Was this not a good decision? Should we do more of this? Should we do less of this?
Awesome. Thank you.
And to add to that, obviously we all want to add value-added ideas as often as possible in the abstract, because that drives more sales, more customer loyalty, and builds company value. And to Colin's point, that can be product related in terms of characteristics and ways in which the product functions better or differently. It can be customer support, which would be a different kind of value add. It can be time from order receipt to delivery. So there was a question earlier about operational efficiencies and how you decide whether you want operational efficiencies as a focus or growth. And they all have to be tied together in a master strategic plan. You can't have a strategic plan that provides for growth or value add and not have a related strategic plan, or at a minimum a set of developed tactics to drive the operational efficiencies. If your house isn't in order, then ultimately your value add will become a overpromise and becomes a real problem. And so looking at your systems and ensuring that they are scalable to respond to the market response to your new value add idea is a key part of all of that.
Thank you, Jim.
I want to build on something that Jim said, if we have time for that.
Sure.
And I think that there are a lot of different ways to look at value-added ideas, and Jim mentioned a couple of them. But, if you think about what you're trying to do, you're trying to lock that customer in, not just for this sale, but you want the lifetime value of that customer to go up. You don't want them to leave. You want them to be a part of that relationship for a great deal of time. You want to make it difficult for them to switch. So if you think about a customer in those contexts, then adding value-added ideas, it could be something that doesn't have as much to do with the product as it does to do with either supporting the product or also supporting the purchase and or implementation of the product on the customer's end. There are a lot of different ways to add value in that relationship that are not necessarily coming out with the same product in a different color and a different flavor. But build on some of the things that Jim mentioned in his response, where you're talking about things that add value to the customer in terms of the time savings and in terms of their ability to then resonate and connect with their customers, where you're making those steps easier for them. That adds an immense amount of value as well. So it's a much more, think about it once again, strategic planning, it's a much more comprehensive look at what you're doing and how you're interfacing with customers and markets.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, we've got another one. Who should be involved in strategic planning? Who should be involved in a strategic planning session in a manufacturing environment? Who should not be involved? How much flexibility should be considered when implementing a strategic plan? Colin's nodding his head. I know he wants to say something.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Yeah, I would say there are a couple of good questions there, right? And it's my personal preference, and I think the other panelists may have had different experiences, right? But my personal preference is starting at a high level of the organization to guide some broad stroke ideas of what are our objectives, make sure that we're all still remain on the same page with those, and then what are our sort of high-level strategy things that we think we need to get done to accomplish that. And then work throughout lower levels of the organization on more specific strategies that help support the strategies above them. Ultimately, I think that the more that you can have key employees, or at least key stakeholders of different employee groups involved in strategic planning, the more adoption I think that you'll find within the workplace. And so what does that look like for us, right? That looks like for us that we eventually pull together some key employees at even the lowest levels of the organization to talk a little bit about the strategy that we've developed thus far, right, to collect their feedback and their input and work to modify or work any of that into it. So at the very least, employees at all levels of the organization feel like they have some amount of ownership, right, over the strategy.
That's a good point. Chris, what do you think? Who should be involved in a strategic plan?
Well, I follow a similar method, except I involve people at all levels early on rather than later on. It's just a matter of preference. I don't think it's a better or a worse way. I think it's just the way I do it, which is I believe in transparency. I believe that the input of those, especially at the executable level, stop you from taking face plants later when they're like, well, if you had asked me, I would have told you that was an impossible task, that we couldn't do that. And so to avoid that, involving people is not the same thing as giving them the decision authority. They're there to edify and inform you. You as the head of the organization still have to slap the table and say, this is the way we're going. So it's there to help you understand perspectives. And in manufacturing, that can be critically important because, again, you're typically dealing with capability limitations. And you want somebody to say, well, that thing you asked me to do, our machinery is not capable of doing that. It's going to take an additional capital investment of X to do that. And those are the kind of things that guys like me can think about and not have thought about the right inputs from all perspectives. So I tend to gather a healthy amount throughout the organization. If I have one preference for not getting them too involved early, it'd be the finance guys, just because they're the boat anchors and they're the ones that are, going to be throwing the boat anchor out early, and I'd rather have the boat anchor thrown out before we actually slap the table. But in the course of rounding out your plan, I prefer a broad cross-section of the organization. And that means both manufacturing and non-manufacturing people involved.
Well, as a finance CPA guy, I have to say, I don't know that I appreciate the boat anchor analogy, although, you know, I did step on the scale this morning, and so there is obviously some truth to that, Chris.
You are a very valuable boat anchor to our organization. I just want to make sure I say that. Yeah. Thanks for the schizophrenic compliment. In any event, to Colin and Chris's point, you know, strategic planning is obviously an interactive process, and so when you involve people, it is driven somewhat by where you are in that decision matrix. You, as the owner or president of the company, you have to define the vision. You have to define where it is you want to go, and that is more upper level. You then start to drill down from vision to objectives, from objectives to strategy, and then ultimately to tactics. And so you involve different people in your organization at each level, at each step of that strategic planning process, so that they can add value at the right time. And, you know, to Chris's point, you bring in the pencil neck financial geeks at the end, so as not to use boat anchors or calculators and blow up your deal. But that has nothing to do with vision. Vision starts at the top, and then it trickles down from there.
Marianne, I think that vision starts at the top, but at larger corporations, my experience was always, it was unspoken, but it became pretty clear in my career that my best friend on a dotted line basis needed to be someone out of the finance area, because it didn't really matter what I wanted to do strategically if we couldn't afford to pay for it. And you're a lot more credible when you've got a partner to work the numbers through with. So it's not like my zeal was getting ahead of me so much as it was, those are decisions that are better presented as a team. And I think at that point, so the way that I see it and what I've taken forward in my career from that large corporate experience is that regardless your functional area, your dotted line partner in that is someone out of corporate finance, not necessarily out of accounting or the controller's office where you're tracking what the costs were, but somebody who can actually put some planning acumen to them as well. And, that's what served us well when we made presentations in turn to the CEO at Toro and at other firms that I've been at. And that's what made those decisions a lot more credible, or what made those presentations rather a lot more credible and easier for senior leadership to approve and to buy off on.
Thanks, Mark. Let's see. Here's another question. How well do your organization's products solve the customer's problems and meet their expectations? Chris, do you have anything?
Well, I'm not sure how to answer that question, because the only real tangible way to answer that question is your profitability, right? So that's, we're always in a continuous battle to improve that. So I don't think I would say that if you're ever satisfied, then you're in the wrong business. I'm in the mode of always looking for improvement, and I don't care how well we're doing. There's always the ability to do better. I think it is, though. I think it is without a doubt important that you solve a problem people have, and you have to know whether you are or not. It doesn't matter how cool your technology is if you don't solve a problem people are willing to pay for. So, we're going through a lot, continuously going through that in our business, whether it's our existing line of polyester shades or whether it is the new personal protective equipment line that we now carry and manufacture. So the answer is not well enough. Never is.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, you bet.
Colin, what about you?
Well, I think I would generally agree with Chris. I would say that, one of the things that we work to do is to try to help solve problems for customers for which there are no current existing solutions. And then we have difficulty of sometimes with customer adoption, right? But it's interesting because, customers don't manufacture the things that we do as manufacturers, right? And so they don't have a knowledge and understanding, maybe, to Chris's earlier point about limitations of technology or manufacturing equipment, and other sort of, institutional restrictions that we have as manufacturers that maybe prevent us from being able to always exceed our customers' goals on a manufactured product point of view. So I think the real challenge is working to execute a product that both meets or exceeds the customer's needs, right, at the appropriate price point, with an appropriate level of profitability, right, to Chris's point, because obviously if we don't make a profit, then none of us make anything. And work within the strictures of what is technically and reasonably possible on a repeated manufacturer basis, right? I can find a machinist in our production facilities to make me one perfect thing pretty much any time. But the question is, can I find 10 machinists within our facility to make 1,000 perfect things anytime I ask them to? Right? That is a much more difficult challenge. And so sometimes that is where we have to make sacrifices and compromises on product solution sides of things for customers.
Right. That's a good point. So one more question here. How will strategic planning strengthen my marketplace position? What factors should I consider?
I mean, I'll throw this out there. Understand everybody's worldview is tainted by where they've spent their career, and my career is essentially product management and product development and business development. So I'm looking at that from a market stance, and I'm saying one of the things that you want to review first in that strategic planning process is a map of competition, a map of the landscape so that you understand what products are in the marketplace. You want a map that shows what consumer need states exist, whether you're B2B or whether you're B2C, so that you understand where those opportunities are, where your products might or might not be in sync, so that you can see whether those are quadrants, if they're empty, that nobody's in for a reason because the profitability isn't there, to Chris's earlier point, or maybe they're quadrants that have recently emerged that nobody's really recognized yet, or maybe they're opportunity areas that other people have slowly drifted away from that now are wide open for you. But until you've mapped that out, it's almost, it makes more sense to map that out and to understand where you want that revenue to come from and what profitability level you want to strike for before you go back then and go through an exercise with the organization trying to move machinery, plants, equipment, people, capital expenditures, and everything else to accommodate a maybe not hypothetical that you've not started to explore or understand yet. So, once again, perhaps a biased perspective, given that my career has been in product management, product development, but nonetheless, that's probably where I would start the process, and that's probably what I would expect my marketplace interaction to be. And the results that came from that then you would hope be new products and improved profitability.
Mark, I would say that I would actually encourage people to go a step further, and that is to work to define their competitor's strategy. Right? Because if you do not understand the strategy of your competition, it does not mean it's a bad strategy. It simply means that you do not understand it. And mapping who they are and then understanding what decisions they are making, I think is critical to be able to set yourself up to be able to react, right, similarly or differently than they are.
That's a good point, Colin. So we're actually about 4 minutes out from time. Can we just give maybe not an overview, like a wrap up, an overview? Let's get into more detail just a wrap up of what you guys think, how important strategic planning is, why it's important for your company.
And my summary would be, regardless of whether you're looking to improve the organization or sell the organization, in which case you have to show how it would be improved. Strategic planning is the cornerstone through which you want to do that. And that should result in a fair and balanced set of voices internally that deliver a fair and balanced set of products that can meet the market needs you're capable of meeting. That was ad hoc, but that gives you paints a bit of a perspective.
That's great. Thanks, Mark.
So,
or Jim.
Certainly love to do ad hoc. So it starts with vision, and if you don't have a company vision, then you should get off the call and define one. And that vision also has to incorporate your values and the values you want to have within your organization, the culture you want to have, and what you want to bring to the community at large. And then from that, you have a mission and objectives. And from that, you have a strategy and approach. And ultimately, Chris's tactical Marine take the hill. So that's what we need. Ad hoc.
Well, so in all fair disclosure, I work with Jim every day, so he and I have intimate talks about this. But for me, and all the things I've heard today are tremendous, insightful from my fellow panelists. But for me, strategy is about building an ethos within your organization. It's a culture. And it's one that engenders confidence in your people that you know what you're doing, because if they don't, they're going to stand back and watch you fail. They're not going to go with you. So a culture of planning is important to the success. How you get there, how you plan, whether you do it on a whiteboard, on PowerPoint, or the back of a piece of cardboard, it's the culture that matters that you're building, and that's one of disciplined, introspective thought that leads you to success.
Thank you, Chris. Colin, your turn to wrap up.
Oh gosh, I think everybody has put it really, really, really succinctly, and I think between Mark and Chris and Jim, I don't have anything to add.
Okay, I think we're going to wrap up our panel.
I have to say that's high praise there, Colin. I appreciate that. Although I think it was more Mark and Chris to just throw around the compliments, and you guys were great.
Thank you, guys. This was a great discussion. I think, Jake, do we have a slide here for contact info? Perfect. Okay, so if anybody has any questions, any audience members, feel free to reach out. Thank you for joining us today. You can find everyone on LinkedIn, and our emails are up here. If you just take a quick screenshot, then you can email us and follow up later with questions. We hope you found value in our expert panel today, and we appreciate you all joining us. Thank you to Spoke Marketing for all these great graphics, and for being a sponsor, and for Enterprise Bank and Trust, and Schmershel Trelure, of course. And thank you all. Thank you, Colin and Chris, for joining us. Mark Bowers, Jim Schmershel, from all of us, we thank you for your time. And please join us on Tuesday, 11/3, for our next earnings curve. It is using a multi-channel approach to grow sales. So we will see you all next time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, all.
Thank you.